In a fantasy world known as Middle-earth, a mysterious ring draws everyone to its power, forged in hatred and with the ability to resurrect the most powerful villain of all time, Sauron. A group of the greatest warriors of various races must protect this one small creature known as a hobbit to get him to Mount Doom, where only then can the ring be destroyed. Though they must face many dangers, both from outside unknown forces, as well as from the very ring itself, bringing out all of the avarice of man. It's up to our heroes to work together to finally destroy the One Ring once and for all. The Lord of the Rings trilogy, based off of the books by J.R.R. Tolkien, tells the story of fantasy, world building, characters, action, adventures, romance, and every form of emotion in between. This story has stood the test of time and has become one of, if not the, greatest fantasy epics of all time. But looking at the story as a whole, through the 3 films, we ask ourselves the question, what makes an epic? The story proper doesn't actually begin with the main characters. It begins with foundational settings of the world, the history, and what led us to the point that we're at. This base summary of the rings, their roles, the races, and the world itself sets the foundation for not only the world we are about to experience, but the world as a whole. This history enriches us into this world as if we are dropped into it, because we are. The ring itself entices us to seek it out, much like the history in which the story takes place. Our main lead, Frodo, is a proxy for us, the audience, not quite knowing the world around him enough to really get by, but not completely unknown to it either. But we, as the audience, experience this new history more than even the main characters. We find out information that they are not privy to. We find out the richness, the race divides between them. We find out so much information in a short period of time, and yet there's still more history underneath the surface. This history enriches us to follow the story and actually entices us more to dig deeper if we so choose. But with that deepness comes something far scarier. Our group of characters, despite starting with each other as unknown strangers, grow bonds with the dangers in which they face, both together and separately. And these dangers range from outside forces like the orcs or Saruman, as well as the very essence and soul of Sauron being an ever-watching eye, not just the actual eye itself, but the ring as its compass to guide it. The ring also is a weapon. It is enticing. It allows its ring bearer to have power that they can't truly control. But much like a drug, it entices you to want and need more, creating a creature like Gollum, who was a hobbit, very much like the main character Frodo. We see the before and after effects of the dangers, as well as the dangers of nature. The dangers themselves are constantly ever-changing as the story progresses. However, those same dangers then become a challenge for them to overcome. Throughout the stories of the Lord of the Rings, we see many, many battles, each of them having a significance in each aspect of the story. Never is there a battle within the stories that feels any sort of lack of importance. We know that despite the various settings, despite the various soldiers and weapons, they're all centered on the common goal, which is the battle for the ring. The orcs wanting it, and the humans and other creatures protecting it from their hands. Knowing full well that these battles all have a central goal, It makes us enjoy and anticipate the battles themselves, more than the cause of why they're fighting. Each battle signifying more and more of a struggle for our heroes, and allowing us, the audience, to engage and relate to the struggles that these characters go through. The characters themselves, Frodo, Sam, Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and all of the others, are very important central figures, of each of them bringing something different to the story. Even a character like Boromir, who we at first are introduced as a rash, boisterous kind of person, and yet extremely cautious, we feel a sense of distrust with Boromir. But when Boromir is killed, we feel a sense of huge loss, because we felt like we barely got to know the character, because much like the other characters, we did. And the remainder of the story, Boromir's death, despite us knowing little about him, holds much more significance, because the weight and the gravity of the situation, of his sacrifice, of him fighting his last breath for these characters, despite barely knowing them, knowing that it was for a bigger cause. It holds much more gravity to the situation. Or we take a character like Aragorn, a seemingly average hunter who we find out is the one true king, descended from the person who actually took out Sauron, and yet his refusal to want to become king, instead rather being a warrior, rather being a fighter, but understanding the gravity of his destiny. These characters are central to the key of the story. Even the villains, Gollum representing the avarice that we feel when we put our wants over our needs, our sacrifices of things that we don't have for things that we want. Sauron representing the want of power. The orcs representing the ravenous nature of just destroying. And it all tangles together in one thing. The genius of Tolkien's writing has always been the simplicity. Never are his characters overcomplicated. They're very simple. They're very easy for the audience to understand. And because of that, they're some of the most imitated and replicated art in all of fantasy fiction. The story itself is also in this same vein. The story is about a mysterious object needing to be destroyed, and the world being in flux because of it. Having characters who did not want this task, but are forced to uphold it, and strangers coming together to help them finish their goal. That story has been around since the dawn of time. Characters being given a task that seems impossible, but with the help of others can be completed. And Tolkien understood that, because the story elements, the beats, the way it is told is what makes it unique. We, much like Frodo, are oblivious to the world around us, and yet we're experiencing it through his eyes, through the other characters' eyes. We attach ourselves in some way, or at least know people like these characters, because the story itself is so beautifully crafted that it has allowed us, or anyone from any scope of life, to attach themselves to it. That's why the very end of the story has so many different endings, because much like any story, the audience doesn't want to say goodbye. But the reason it has many endings is because they don't want to leave any stone unturned. Much like life, we never really want to say goodbye. And that's why when it does end, it feels heavy, but necessary. That is the pure gravity of the writing of this story and what it means to so many people. So, what makes an epic? The term epic means grandiose. It means something bigger than a normal story like this. And the reason The Lord of the Rings is considered an epic is because its ability to transcend time, its ability to take the history, the dangers, the battles, characters, and story all to center around our ability to attach ourselves to it with each struggle, conversation, interaction, and even subtle moments. There's something deeper within the meaning of it. It entices us to want to know more. It entices us to keep watching, keep engaging. And that is what creates an epic. The ability to tell people this story in the same way we would tell legends of other stories in real life. Legends of people, legends of things. We put them in the same category as we do things in folklore, things in fairy tales, because they are the same to us. And The Lord of the Rings is one of the greatest epics of all time.
Like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy? Even darkness must pass. A new day will come. And when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you. That meant something. Even if you were too small to understand why.
But in the end, these aren't answers. They're hypotheticals.
本当のことが言えねえのは人間だ。人間ってやつは自分自身さえ白状しねえことはたくさんある。そうかもしれん。しかし人間は弱いからそうなんだ。弱いからこそ嘘をつく。